What's up YouTube? Today I'm going to walk you through a slightly different design than what I usually make. Now this is a vintage poster called Leap and it's got a lot of colour involved, so let's jump straight into the steps in Photoshop. Okay, moving into Photoshop here is the finished poster design. Now, as I mentioned already, there is a lot of colour in this. Now this is a lot more than what I usually use. I'm usually stuck to black and white and maybe a bit of orange. There's some cool like threshold masking going on here, there's some nice type, and then some cool radial gradient effects. So let's just jump into creating a new canvas. As per usual, I'm going to be using 3840 by 4800 pixels. Now this is my standard for all my design work, 300 resolution, and then I'm going to hit OK. Now the first step for this, I'm going to be pasting in the image. So I've sourced this image from Unsplash, which I'll link in the description. And the first step I've got to take with this is using thresholds. So you can see on this original, all of this is effectively turned into just black. So I'm going to select this image layer. I'm going to come down to adjustments. Then I'm going to hit threshold. And now with this threshold bar, as I drag it left and right, you're going to see how the dark and light areas are hidden and revealed. But now because there are three separate areas of the image, you've got the foreground, which is the two boys here, the background, which is the buildings, and even this kind of river in the middle here. But as I slide this, there is no equal balance for each of them, so I'm going to have to use individual layers. So for this first one, I'm going to focus just on the two boys at the front. So I'm going to set the balance to about here. Now this is good enough to see the detail of them. So now once I've set this balance, I'm going to hide this. And now I'm going to come down and make another threshold layer. Now this next one is going to be for the houses. So I want these roofs in good visibility. I think in terms of detail, I'm probably going to sit about there. I'm going to name this roof, name this boy. So I'm going to hide this one. I'm going to make one more threshold layer. Now this final one is just going to be the river at the front. As you can see, it kind of any balance is very difficult to see. But I'm going to say about there is good for the moment. You can still get a little bit of detail there. So now the method here is I need to do masking on each of them so that we can reveal the correct areas of each. Okay, so now coming onto the masking here, this can be a little bit tricky to kind of keep track. But the first thing I'm going to do is these two boys here that are jumping. So I need to isolate these to keep them on their own threshold layer. So I'm going to select this image, and hopefully if I use select and subject, it's just going to highlight those two, which it has done. So now with this selection, you can see the two boys are highlighted here. So now if I press W to get my magic wand tool, I'm just going to add in a bit of selection here just to help this mask. Now this can be rough because obviously the threshold layers is only black and white. There's not too much detail that's going to get hidden. So now with this mask selected, I'm going to press D to make sure that my default colors are selected. Then I'm going to press X to make sure that black is my background. So now the way that these threshold layers work is that the bottom layer is the one that is in control. So if I hide these two, you see it doesn't do anything. Whatever is at the bottom is the one that's going to be showing. So I'm going to mask it off of this layer. So I'm going to press X, make sure that black is my background, use Command Backspace to mask that. And now you can see that the mask for the boys is now showing for the river layer. So I also need to copy this mask onto this layer. So if I use Command Click on the roof selection, select the river mask. Now, because we have an area hidden, it's now inverted the mask. So we need to re-invert it again. So it's just selecting these two boys here. So use Command Shift and I to invert that. Select the river mask and then Command Backspace. So now you can see that if I hide this threshold layer here, it's just the two boys that are affected by this layer, which is exactly what we want. You can notice there's a small patch here with color poking through. So we're just going to use the black brush just to hide that as well. So I'm just going to use B and I'm just going to paint that in on both layers. So now just moving on to the final masking of this, we have the roof layer at the bottom, which is in control of most of the color right now. And we've got the river layer here. So now all we need is this color to apply on the bottom section rather than it be just complete black like this. So what we're going to do is come onto this roof mask layer and I'm going to make my brush slightly bigger. Make sure that I've got a black brush on. So press X and make sure that black is your foreground. And I'm just going to paint across the bottom here. Now this is going to hide the dark value on the roof layer and it's going to reveal it on the river layer, which is a separate threshold value. So you can see as I paint this in, these white areas are being revealed, which is offering a lot more detail and contrast. So I'm just going to really subtly paint along here, get a nice really faint white outline on that roof. And there we go. It's just as simple as that, just using a black and white brush. And now this black coming into the sky here, I'm going to remove. So I've got my black brush again. I'm just going to paint over this. And now what I might even do is select all the layers. I'm just going to slightly move up this image, make it a little bit higher there, so that's okay. Now, obviously, as we've just adjusted this, I'm just going to paint in some extra black areas so that the river at the bottom has some more reveal to it. And there we go. That is our threshold masking complete. So now we can move on to a bit more of the color work. Right now, you can see back over on this original design that if I turn these color overlays off, it's still not solid black and white. So what I've done here is I've added a gradient map just to prevent it from being completely solid white and completely solid black. It adds just a little bit more of a print look, I feel. So I'm simply just going to come over to this layer, over to this canvas, and then I'm going to come down to adjustments. I'm going to add a gradient map here. I'm going to make sure that this gradient icon is selected. I'm going to select the bar, and then I have a few presets here that I'm going to use. So here, simply if I just select the hex codes here, just drag slightly up from solid black. And then what I will do is I'll come over to this between orange and yellow, and I'm just going to drag slightly in this way. And it's going to become a bit more of like a creamy white. And then from here, hit OK, and I'm going to hit reverse. So now even just making this subtle adjustment, if I switch it on and off, just adds a little bit more detail from being solid black and white. What we're going to try and create now is this sun-like radial layer, and it's this really nice gradient. And you can see here there's this white circle, which once I put in the second color overlay, it's going to act as the sun in this image. So the first step is to create this color layer, which obviously has a mask on as well, which I'm going to show you. So if I remove this, this is what it's going to look like. So let me sort this out. So if we come onto the new document, I'm going to press G to select the gradient tool. Now with this gradient, I'm going to make sure that up here, the radial icon is selected so that it creates it in a circle. And then I'm going to select this gradient bar. Now I have a preset saved here of the colors that I'm going to use. Now, if you just simply select pale yellow, orange, blue, and pink, you're going to get there. But what I can show you is how to create this yourself so that you can use this up here. So I'm going to come down, and I'm going to come down to gradient map, and then I'm going to select this icon, select the bar. Now from here, we're going to use a gradient editor so that we can create it. So if I select on here on the preset, see for now, the position of them doesn't matter too much because we can adjust it on the gradient tool. So for here, on the left-hand side, I'm going to select a really pale yellow, but I'm going to kind of shift this a little bit more into a vibrant yellow as I'm going to make this poster slightly different. Then in the center, I've got a pink, kind of like a pinky red hue, and then more into a flat orange here, and then a pale blue at the end. So now once I have made this preset, what you want to do is hit the new tab here, and you can see it's going to create a duplicate, or it's going to create whatever you have adjusted here into a preset. So when you then remove this gradient map layer. Okay, so now with my gradient selected up here and no layers selected down here, I'm going to drag from the center point towards the top of the canvas. Now about here is good, but this is obviously all adjustable with these bars here. So now we need to arrange the mask. So I'm going to hide this for the moment. And what we want to do is mask it behind the jumpers here and behind the roofs, so it just matches the sky. So a simple way of doing this is coming onto the image layer, and I'm going to use select and then sky. You can see here it's going to create a really nice masking area here just of this white sky area. Now I'm just going to use the magic wand tool by pressing W to make some additions to this. So I'm going to hold shift, just add in these areas that it's slightly missed. And then once I've made this, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill this with black. Now I'm just going to use this as a fill color because then if I come to command click this, it's now a mask that's saved for me on this layer. So I'm just going to name this mask and then hide this layer. So now I'll come back onto this gradient fill. I'm going to remove this mask, command click on the mask we've just made, and then select the mask icon down here. Now immediately you can see this has already been blended into the sun and been masked behind all of the houses and the jumpers. So from this point, we can double click on this gradient icon, or actually we're going to press G, and then from here we're going to adjust the colors to the balance and position that we want. So I want it to be a bit more of a harsh contrast between the yellow and the pink here, so I'm going to bring this yellow up. And what I'm even going to do is double click on this, and I'm going to adjust the colors. So again, when you come to creating the gradient, when you use the preset, it does not need to be perfect because obviously it's easier to adjust it here than it is to create a gradient map and do it there. So I'm going to make this more of a solid yellow, and then I'm also going to copy this hex code value so I can use it in the other gradient. So I'm going to create a harsher contrast by dragging this pink down, dragging that yellow up, maybe slightly down. And then from here I'm okay. So I'm just going to press V, click off it, and now we've got our sun gradient selected. So from here now, we need to come back onto this reference, and I'm going to show you this second layer, which is similar colors, but slightly darker just to put more contrast towards this top area. And so what we're going to do is create this. So again, select your gradient tool. I have this preset saved, so I'm just going to use that simply just to save time. I'm going to make sure it's set to linear rather than radial, and I'm going to drag from the bottom up. And then from here, I'm going to select this blending mode layer as darker color. Now this is basically going to mean that it applies the color behind the threshold layers, but it doesn't really interfere with this top half. Now you can see here it's slightly reaching in here. So if I just drag this down, it's now only revealing the yellow. I think the reason is because this yellow is it's not matching the yellow of this. So I'm gonna double click here, paste in that hex code we have saved, and now immediately you can see it's now blended a lot better. So once again, just use these tabs to adjust the lighting to where you want it. Now I'm going to get a bit of a fade glow here onto the river, so I'm going to get this a little bit lower. you know, kind of blend this well, play around with that pink down there. And there we go. You can kind of blend around the colors exactly how you want. It's easier to just throw in any gradient and then double click on these and edit the colors here. So don't worry too much about presets and getting the right saves beforehand. Just get into it and then start adjusting it from there. Okay, just shifting onto the text assets now. We've got the title and then this subtitle here and then just some small tertiary text down at the bottom. So I'm just going to show you how, using just one typeface here, how I can create all three of those. So I'm using Ivy Presto Display. Now there's a few ways I'm using regular when I'm using light and thin. So the title is going to be light and I'm going to type in leap with the exclamation point. Now from here, just use your transform tools. And what I did with this is I used Option and Shift and I stretched this vertically. Now I feel like this is quite a common trait amongst vintage poster design and it can be considered a cardinal sin in graphic design, but I quite like the aesthetic of it and I think it doesn't affect any readability. So I guess it can work in this occasion. I'm just going to make this slightly smaller and then I'm going to type in the into the unknown. Once again, transform tools, I'm going to shrink this right down. So I'm just going to adjust the tracking here so that it's readable. And then I'm going to repeat the same step. I'm going to first of all shift the weight down to thin, Command T, and I'm going to just stretch this out slightly and then align it with the bottom of the remaining text. Now I also have the leading slightly in here just to create a bit more of a compressed look. So again, if I just shrink this, you can see the difference it makes. Now, I really like this aesthetically, but sometimes going too far on it means it's harder to read. So I'm going to keep it just how it is at the moment. And then just for the bottom text, I'm just going to create a text box and I'm going to just paste in the text here. Now again, simply, I'm just using thin. I've just changed the points down to 30. And then as it's in the text box, it's a lot easier to justify. So select these three dots, align to canvas, center, justify. Then I can just shrink the text box down to the bottom. And there we go. That is our text worked in. So now we can just move on to the texture layers and final details. So I'm just going to group in these text layers and then I'm going to paste in our only texture layer. Now this is sourced from Duron Studio, so I'm going to link it in the caption. Some great kind of like photocopy scan textures and you can see these kind of like diagonal line details going through. So with this one, simply as we're using a lot of kind of like mid-tone colors, I'm going to select this blending mode and I'm going to set it to screen. So now screen is great for applying across a range. And I'm going to drop this opacity down to maybe about, I'd say about 30 or 40%. Now with this screen layer applied, I often pair this with another blending mode. So I'm going to Command J to duplicate this and scroll through a few of the options. I think for the moment I'm going to go with color dodge and I'm going to just drop the opacity down again, maybe about 20. And you can see already it's tying and really giving this nice vintage look with this kind of like washed out color. And then the only thing I'm noticing here is that the text doesn't seem to have any texture applied to it. Now this is genuinely because of the blending modes and because it's the lightest color value, those two blending options are not going to apply to it. So once again, I'm just going to create another duplicate of this layer and I'm going to set this to exclusion. So now with this, everything becomes slightly gray. So I don't really want this as it's taking some of the color out, almost a bit too much of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just isolate the text, which is what we want to be targeted. So by doing that, I'm going to open the drop-down box on text. I'm going to hold Command and select the T layer on Leap, hold Shift, and then just select the T icon for all of the text layers. Now from this point, make sure that our exclusion layer is selected, hit Mask, and then from here we can adjust the opacity and it will just target the text. So we can get a good balance here of where we want it to be. I think maybe 25% will be good here, and you can see now that the texture is applying across both. Now just to give it a slight bit of detail, I'm just going to duplicate this text layer, hide the initial, and then convert this to a smart object. From here I'm going to come up to Filter, Stylize, and Diffuse. Now this is just going to be a nice little kind of like vintage look where it's just going to roughen the edges slightly. It's going to be really subtle, but gives it a kind of slight bit of texture. You see once I zoom out to about here, it looks a lot more like the text is written on. So yeah, works really well, especially on thin text. And now just for one kind of overlay to top it off, which I think works great with gradients, is a noise layer. So I'm going to select this top layer so that it applies above. I'm going to come down to adjustments and solid color. I'm going to set the hex code at 808080, which is 50% gray. And then what we're going to do is apply the noise to this layer, which is then going to mark as an overlay. So come up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and convert this to a smart object. So now from here, I'm going to come over to this effects panel on the right, and you're going to see this grain option at the bottom. So I'm going to drop down arrow here, and I'm going to set the grain to 100, the roughness to 100, and the size to about 20. That's great, as you can adjust the size, which is a great feature for noise, but I'm going to keep it to around 20 for my sake, and I'm going to press OK here. Now I'm just going to rename this layer to noise, just collapse all of the additionals, and I'm going to set this layer mode to overlay. Now noise works amazing with color, but you can see here it's very strong, so I'm going to bring this down slightly. So I'm going to select this noise layer, just play around with the opacity, maybe even just set it to around 20-25% here. You can see it gives it just really nice touch, kind of ties this color all together with this kind of noise detail. And with that, that is the final design complete. Now YouTube, as always, thank you so much for watching until the very end. I hope I can be useful to you. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll see you again very soon.